Assalamu alaikum. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to write task 1 in academic IELTS. Let's take a look. Okay. So in task 1, you might be asked to write about any of the following 6 types: pie charts, bar charts, tables, line graphs, maps, and processes. The most common types are the first 4 types: the pie charts, the bar charts, the tables, and the line graphs. Maps and processes are not so common, so we're not going to focus them on today's lesson very much. But like the information that I'm going to present today is also going to be useful for maps and processes. You need to understand that pie charts and bar charts and tables and line graphs are all ways of representing numerical data. You should treat them all in the same way. If you don't know what they are, so I'm going to explain to you what they are. Look at the following example. The percentage of Egyptians who want to immigrate is 80%, whereas those who don't want to immigrate are 15% and 5% are undecided. If you have the following piece of information and you would like to present it in the form of a pie chart or a bar chart or a table or a line graph, it goes like this. If it's a table, so you're going to have the first column: interested, not interested, undecided, 80%, 15%, 5%. That's a table. Pie chart, so it goes like that. This part is for the ones who are interested in immigration, not interested, undecided. That's a pie chart. Bar chart, interested, not interested, undecided. That's a bar chart. If you want to have a line graph usually represents chronological change. So that's change over a period of time. You have to have information about at least 2 different points in time. You can't have a line graph with information about 1 point in time. You have to have at least 2 or more. So we can alter that piece of information. We can say, for example, in 1940, the percentage of Egyptians who were interested in immigration was 40%, not interested was 50%, undecided were 10%. That's 1940. And in 2020, interested became 80%, not interested 15%, and undecided became 5%. Okay, so now we can represent that in the form of a line graph. It will be like that. So that's 1940, that's 2020. Interested increased from 40 to 80, not interested decreased from 50 to 15, and undecided decreased from 10 to 5. That's a line graph. You may ask me, will I be needing to draw line graphs in the IELTS exam? No, of course not. You'll do the opposite. They will give you line graphs or any kinds of charts, pie charts or bar charts or tables, and you are supposed to write essays about that. But I just wanted you to understand what these are. What's the line graph? What's the pie chart, the bar chart, and so on. Now you understand that all the 4 types basically do the same thing. They represent numerical data. This is why treating them differently would be wrong. You need to treat them all in the same way. All of them need to be treated in the same way. All the line graphs and the pie charts and the bar charts and the tables need to be treated in the same way. So how should you approach any of the 4 charts in task 1? Like, how should you write about them? First, you're supposed to paraphrase the question. And that's all you have to do in the introduction. That's all you have to do. Just paraphrase the question. You may tell me, but if I paraphrase the question, then the introduction is going to be too short. It's just going to be 1 sentence. Yes, this is acceptable in task 1. It's very acceptable to have paragraphs that consist of only 1 sentence or 2 sentences. That's it. Actually, the majority of the paragraphs in task 1 will consist of 1 sentence. Your introduction will be 1 sentence mostly. Your overall paragraph will be 1 sentence, and so on. After you've finished writing an introduction, you're going to write something which is called an overall paragraph. In this paragraph, you describe the main trends or ideas in the chart. That's the overall paragraph, and I'm going to explain to you how to write it. Then after that, you're supposed to write the body paragraphs based on the summary you provided in the previous overall paragraph. And then after that, you may choose to add a closing paragraph that has any striking noticeable information in the chart. But this is optional. And it's not a conclusion. We don't call it a conclusion. It's not. So one more time, the format of a typical task 1 essay in academic IELTS. Introduction, which is the paraphrase of the question. It's usually 1 sentence, 1 paragraph that consists of 1 sentence. Overall paragraph, which focuses on the main facts or trends, it's usually 1 or 2 sentences. Body paragraphs based on the overall paragraph, and then an optional closing paragraph. It's not a conclusion. You don't have to write it. You only write it if you are short on word count and you need to increase the number of words. And I'm going to show you how to write it. Okay. Now, step 1, the introduction. How do we write the introduction? Let's look at the question here. The tables below give information about the sales of fair trade labeled coffee and bananas in 1999 and 2004 in 5 European countries. How do you paraphrase? So maybe you say something like the 2 tables. How do I know that there are 2 tables? I look at the tables and I write the number. If there are 3, I write the 3 tables. 4, I write the 4 tables, and so on. Contain sales data. Give information about sales. Contain sales data. Give information, contain data. For fair trade coffee and bananas in 1999 and 2004 in 5 nations of Europe. So European countries became nations. Please be careful that some things cannot be paraphrased, because I see some of my students, they try to find synonyms for everything, literally everything. And in some cases you can't. For example, can you find a synonym for coffee? I don't know, you can't. Can you find a synonym for bananas? You can't. So it's not a rule that you have to find synonyms for every single word in the question. You do what you can, you do your best, but not for everything, because some words don't have synonyms. Here's another example. The 3 pie charts below show the changes in annual spending by a particular UK school in 1981, 91, and 2001. That charts. So if they write the numbers, you don't write the numbers. If they don't write the numbers, you write the numbers. The 3 pie charts, you make them the charts. Show how much a UK school spent. Show the changes in annual spending. So what I did here is that I changed the grammar. I changed the format of the sentence. Instead of saying show the changes in annual spending, I said how much a UK school spent on different running costs in 3 separate years, 1981, 91, and 2001. Here's another example. The graph below shows the proportion of the population ages 65 and over between 1940 and 2040 in 3 different countries. The graph shows the increase. How do I know it's an increase? I look at the graph itself, and if it's an increase, I can write that it's an increase. In the aging population, so that's another way of saying population ages 65, aging population. In Japan, Sweden, and the USA. If they write 3 countries, I write Japan, Sweden, and the USA. If they write the names of the countries, I write 3 different countries. Here's another example. The graph below shows the consumption of fish and some different kinds of meat in a European country between 1979 and 2004. The graph illustrates changes in the amounts of beef, lamb, chicken, and fish. So what I did here, like they wrote some different kinds of meat. And then I looked at the line graph and I listed these kinds of meat. And if they do the opposite, if they say the amounts of beef, lamb, chicken, and fish, then I say different kinds of meat consumed in a particular European country over the period of 25 years, starting from 1979. You do the math. From 1979 to 2004, that's 25 years. Okay, so you practice, please. You practice. Take some time. That's the question. The chart below shows the results of a survey about people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits in 5 Australian cities. And that's the chart. Please pause the video, and what you need to do is to try to write your own introduction. Don't continue the video until you've written the introduction. So get a pen and a piece of paper and actually write down your own introduction. Okay, now I'm gonna show you a sample answer, and of course your answer might be different. It's okay. There's no way that we can think the same. The diagram presented illustrates, so we can call that a diagram. The findings, results could be findings of a questionnaire. Survey could be a questionnaire regarding individuals' purchasing and consumption pattern, purchasing, buying, and drinking of coffee and tea in 5 cities across Australia. Wanna try again? Try again. Here's another question. The graph below shows the number of tourists visiting a particular Caribbean island between 2010 and 2017. And that's the graph. Please pause the video and write your own introduction. And then in a few seconds, I'm going to show you my introduction. Okay. You can pause, you can continue writing, but I'm going to show you my introduction right now. The chart displays statistics of travelers who visited a specific Caribbean island over the period of 7 years, starting from 2010. Okay, here's one more example. The chart below shows what anthropology graduates from one university did after finishing the graduate degree course. The table shows the salaries of the anthropologists in work after 5 years. So here we have a pie chart and we have a table at the same time, and we're supposed to write one task, one essay about them. But we don't care about how we're going to write the essay. We don't care about the body paragraphs and so on. We just need to focus on the introduction right now. So pause the video and write an introduction in which you paraphrase this question. Okay, now I'm going to show you my answer. The diagram illustrates the post-graduation paths pursued by anthropology alumni. Alumni means graduates from a single university. The table provides information about the earnings of those anthropologists, earnings, salaries. Anthropologists who were employed after a span of 5 years. Span means a period. Okay. So step one was writing the introduction, and one more time, if you want to write the introduction in task one, all you have to do is to paraphrase the question. That's it. You don't write anything else. And this introduction is usually one sentence or two sentences maximum. That's it. Now, the overall paragraph. How do we write an overall paragraph? There are two choices for what you can do in the overall paragraph. You can either summarize the main features, but in some cases you cannot really summarize. So all you have to do is to illustrate the most prominent features, the clearest features without summarizing. Of course, the first one is preferred, is better, but you cannot do it all the time. So all you gotta do, like if you cannot really summarize, is to focus on the most prominent features. And I'm gonna explain to you what this means. Okay. Just imagine that this is the line graph that you're supposed to write about. You have 4 variables, and you can see that. Okay. How do you write an overall paragraph? Well, it's clear in this overall paragraph that 2 variables are increasing and the other 2 are decreasing. So when you write your overall paragraph, it's going to be like this. Overall, it's worth noting that there are 2 basic general trends, upwards and downwards. That's the downward trend and that's the upward trend. That's it. How about this one? Okay, you can see that there are actually 3 trends here. One variable is decreasing, the other one is increasing, but this one, is it decreasing or increasing? Well, let's look at the first point. It's around 3, and the last point is also around 3. So we can see that there is basically no change. It's almost stable. So in the overall paragraph, we can say overall, the graph shows that there are 3 trends, downwards, upwards, and almost no change. Here, how about this one? Now, we cannot really use what we said in the previous 2 examples. You cannot talk about trends because all of them are increasing. All the variables are increasing. So what can we do? Well, perhaps we can divide them into 2 groups. One group here in which there's a big gap between A, B, and then C and D on the other side. So we can comment on the big gap. We cannot really divide them into increasing and decreasing. We can just comment on the big gap. So we can say overall the graph unmistakably indicates that the values of variables C and D are markedly greater than those of variables A and B. I'm sorry, it should, like I made a mistake, it should be A and B are markedly greater than those of C and D because A and B are higher than C and D. And then how about this example? The table illustrates the number of multinational companies in some countries in the years 1990 and 2010. That's a table here. We've got Egypt, England, France, Libya, Tunisia, Germany, Algeria. And we've got 2 years, 1990 and 2010. And then we have the number of multinational companies. In Egypt, it was 20, it became 30, 70, 73, 65, 70, 10, 20, 12, 24, 90, 140, 10, and 15. What we need to do in the overall paragraph is to find a way to divide them into groups. Because really, that's the whole point of the overall paragraph, is to divide random variables into groups. You can imagine that you're trying to arrange some toys that belong to a child. You're trying to classify them into groups. So there are many ways to classify the toys into groups. Maybe you can classify them according to the color. All the red toys would belong in one bag and the blue ones would belong in another bag. Maybe classify them into genders. So all the feminine toys should go in one bag, and then the masculine toys for boys should go in a different bag. Or according to the size, big toys and small toys, or according to the value, expensive toys and cheap toys. Now let's get back to this table. If you are going to classify these variables, how are you going to classify them? I need to give you some time to think. Pause the video and think. Think. Try to divide them into groups. Okay, I will help you. So there are basically two ways. The first way is to look at the overall number of multinational companies. Just look at the overall number, right? If the number is big, then you are going to put them in one group. If the numbers are small, then you're going to put them in another group. So for example, you can look at Algeria. The number seems to be small here, 10, 15. So we're going to assume that Algeria belongs to the small number of multinational companies. Germany, definitely big. Tunisia, is it small or big? Small. It's closer to Algeria than it is to Germany. So small. Libya, small. France, big. England, big. Egypt, small. That's the first way. So you can say that the countries can be divided according to the total number of multinational companies, small and big. And you're not going to take into consideration the change over the years, right? Now, the other way is to take into consideration the change over the years. So look at the increase here. Algeria increased by 5 countries. So that's a small increase. Germany, 50, big increase. Tunisia, 12. Is it small or big? Perhaps we can draw a number, like we can set any number, right? And it's our personal choice. It can be any number you decide. If it's higher than this number, then you're going to consider it to be a big increase. If it's smaller than that number, it's going to be a smaller increase. So let's say that this number is going to be 10. If the number of multinational companies, if the increase is more than 10, then we are going to call it big increase. Here in the situation, Tunisia is 12. So we're going to say that Tunisia is a big increase. Libya, that's 10. So that's exactly the number. So let's make it 10 and above. So Libya is big increase. France, that's 5. So that's small increase. England, 3, small increase. Egypt. So that's big increase. So one more time, in the big increase, we're going to have Germany, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. In the small increase, we're going to have Algeria and France and England. So big increase and small increase. You can see from this discussion that I had with you that there are two ways basically to, there are many ways if you want to write an overall paragraph. It's usually not one fixed way. And here in this situation, you can divide the variables according to the total number of companies or according to the increase itself, whether it's a big increase or a small increase. So based on this discussion, if you want to write the overall paragraph, it might be like that. The table shows that European countries have a considerably higher number of international companies than African countries. When we looked at the total number of companies in Germany and France and England, it was huge in comparison with the other countries, Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia and Egypt. And by coincidence, these countries, England, France, and Germany, are European, and those countries, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, are African. Or your overall paragraph can focus on the increase. So you're going to say overall, the table shows that the number of international companies increased in all countries, albeit with varying degrees. So albeit means although with varying degrees. So there are degrees of the increase, big increase, small increase. Okay, now that was information about how you can write the overall paragraph. How about the body paragraphs now? How can you write the body paragraphs? You divide the body paragraphs according to the overall paragraph that you wrote before, or according to the number of groups you can classify the variables into. For example, here in the situation, we said that we have two trends, downwards and upwards. So based on this information, you're going to have two body paragraphs, one for the upward trend and another for the downward trend. And the total number of paragraphs in this essay is going to be four. One for the introduction, one for the overall paragraph, one for the body paragraph that talks about the downward trend, and another for the body paragraph that talks about the upward trend. And each one of these paragraphs is going to be short, one or two sentences. That's it. That's what you need to do in task one. Here's another example. We said here in the situation that there are three trends. So you're going to have one paragraph for the upward trend, one paragraph for the downward trend, and one paragraph for the no change variable. And here, the total number of paragraphs in this essay is going to be 5. Introduction, overall, upward, downward, no change. And remember that in task 1, we don't need to write a conclusion. We write a closing paragraph, but it's optional. Okay, how about the situation? You remember that discussion that I had with you about the total number of companies or about the increase? If you look at this approach, we said that the table shows that the European countries have a considerably higher number of international companies than African countries. So you're going to have one paragraph for African countries, another for European countries. That's it. How about this approach? The table shows that the number of international companies increased in all countries, albeit with varying degrees. So one paragraph for high increase countries, another for low increase countries. That's it. Now, how do you write the body paragraphs? We now know how many paragraphs we're going to write. It depends on what you mentioned in the overall paragraph. But how about the details inside the body paragraph? What do you include inside the body paragraph? Let's imagine that inside your body paragraph, you're going to comment on this variable, right? This variable discusses sales in anything, in a certain cafe, for example, from 1980 to 2010. And it's clear here that in 1980, the sales were like $10,000. And 1980, it became $15,000. In 2000, it became $20,000. In 2010, it became $25,000. So how are you going to write about that? What information are you going to include in the body paragraph? Are you going to comment on each year? Are you going to say 1980, 1990, 2000, and 2010? What are you going to do? Well, it's clear here that it's not important for us to focus, to comment on each one of the 4 years because it's basically the same increase. It's the same pattern. So we don't have to write about that. It's enough for us to just comment on the first year and the last year. And that's it. So we can say, for example, sales increased constantly from $10,000, for example, in 1980 to $25,000 in 2010. That's it. That's all you're going to mention about this line. Now, are you going to do the same thing with everything? Are you just going to comment on the starting point and the end point? No, not necessarily. Let's look at the next example. Okay, how about this situation? You can see that the sale started at around 10 in 1980, increased to almost 30 in 1990, and then decreased to about 15 in 2000, and then decreased to 5 in 2010. Are you also going to do the same thing that we did in the previous line graph? You're going to comment on the starting point and the end point? Obviously not. This seems to be different. It seems that there is a peak here in 1990, and then there's a gradual and constant decrease from 1990 to 2000. So you need to comment on the starting point, true, and then you're going to comment on 1990, and then you're going to comment on 2010, and it's not important for you to comment on 2000 because it's following the same pattern. So you might write something like that. Sales started with 10 in 1980, peaked at 30 in 1990, and then gradually deteriorated again to 5 in 2010. Okay, how about here in this situation? Remember this table with the European countries and the African countries? How would you write the body paragraphs? In the first approach, European and African countries, in which you are commenting on the overall number of international companies, you can write the body paragraph like that. Regarding European countries, in 1990, Germany had the highest number of multinational companies. You always start with the highest number. And then what comes after that? Like you work your way down, followed by England, 70, and France, 65. Can you see how we put the numbers between parentheses? And this is useful, and it helps you to avoid repeating the same words. Instead of saying the highest number of multinational companies followed by England, 70 multinational companies, and France, 65 multinational companies. You can just put the numbers like that, and that's it. By 2020, the numbers increased dramatically to 140, 73, and 70 respectively. And this is a very useful structure. It helps you to avoid repeating the names of the countries. Instead of saying 140 for Germany, 73 for England, 70 for France, you can just say 140, 73, and 70 respectively. So it's understood that we're talking about Germany, England, and France in that order. The African countries had a significantly smaller number in 1990, ranging from 20 in Egypt to 10 in both Libya and Algeria. So we comment on the highest, which is Egypt, 20, and then 10 in Libya and Algeria, because Tunisia is in the same range. It's 12, so it's between 20 and 10. That's it. You can comment on the highest and lowest numbers, and everything else is in this range. These numbers rose to 30 in Egypt and 15 in Algeria, with Tunisia and Libya being in the same range. Again, we're doing the same thing. We're commenting on the highest and lowest and saying that the other countries are in the same range. So this way we avoid too much repetition and too many details. How about the second approach, the one that commented on the low increase versus the high increase? The high increase was Germany, Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. The low increase was Algeria, France, and England. So how would we write the body paragraphs? Over the given period, Germany, Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya witnessed huge increases in multinational companies, ranging from an increment of 50 companies in Germany to 10 in both Libya and Egypt. Again, we're commenting on the highest and the lowest. The other countries witnessed a relatively lower rise. Pay attention to how we say the other countries. This is a good technique in order to avoid repeating the names of the countries if you have written them already in the overall paragraph. But if you haven't written them in the overall paragraph, you can list their names here. Witnessed a relatively lower rise. Both Algeria and France had only 5 extra companies, and England increased from 70 to 73. Okay, now this is a good exercise for you. The bar chart illustrates the subjects in which male and female students scored 90% or higher in the final year exams. First, you need to write an introduction. Pause and then write an introduction. And after you're done with the introduction, write an overall paragraph. How would you write an overall paragraph? You're supposed to find a way to be able to divide these variables into groups. So think of a good way to divide them into groups. I will give you some time, and then I'm going to show you my answer, but you need to think first. You need to grab a pen and a piece of paper and write your own overall and your own introduction first before the overall paragraph. Okay, time for me to show you my answer, but you need to continue working if you haven't finished. So the introduction, the bar graph depicts the academic fields in which male and female students achieved a score of 90% or above during their last year examinations. That's your introduction. Nothing but a paraphrase of the question as we agreed before. The overall paragraph. Overall, it's clear that females scored higher than males in languages. Oh, yep, that's true. English, French, and German. Yep, they were languages. Whereas the pattern was reversed in math, science, and geography. Pattern was reversed, that means males scored higher than females. That's your overall paragraph. But that's only one way, one approach. You can write the overall paragraph in a different way. It doesn't have to be only that. Overall, it's noticeable that math, science, and German had a considerable gap between the genders. So here we're going to focus on the gap between the genders, regardless of who's higher and who's lower. When you look here, you will find in geography, the gap is small, but here the gap is big, big, big. As you can see here, the gap is big in favor of females, but here the gap is big in favor of males, and here small gap, small gap. So that's a different way, different approach. While the differences were relatively smaller in the other subjects. Now, when you write your body paragraphs, first approach, overall, it's clear that females scored higher than males in languages, whereas the pattern was reversed in math, science, and geography. When it comes to English, French, and German, female student scores ranges from 65 in French to 70 in both English and German. Again, we're starting with the lowest and ending with the highest, or the opposite. You can start with the highest and end with the lowest. However, males scored lower, averaging between 50 in German to 60 in English, lowest to highest. In the other subjects, and we write other subjects to avoid repetition, males had the upper hand, with scores varying from 50 in geography to 70 in math, lowest and highest. Females were close in geography, 45, but the gap was much greater in science and math, 35 and 40 respectively. That's the first approach. How about the second approach? Now, when it comes to the second approach, you can write like that. Overall, it's noticeable that math, science, and German had a considerable gap between the genders. While the differences were relatively smaller in the other subjects, we said that we're going to concentrate on the gap, whether there's a big gap between the two genders or a smaller gap. And here, the second approach is about this gap. So you're going to write one paragraph for the big gap, another paragraph for the smaller gap. Math and science had the greatest discrepancies. Discrepancies means differences between males and females, 30 in both in favor of males, whose scores were 60 and 65 respectively. The difference in German was 20, but in favor of females this time. There was not a significant variation in English, French, and geography. In the first two subjects, female scores were between 65 and 70, and males were slightly lower than that. When it comes to geography, males scored 50 and females were a little less, 45. Okay, now how do you write a closing paragraph? As we said before, the closing paragraph is optional. You don't have to write it, only if you feel short in word count. So if you haven't reached 150 words, then you need to write a closing paragraph. But if you have, it's okay. You may decide to write a closing paragraph even if you're not short in word count, if you feel that there is an interesting piece of information, like something interesting that you didn't have a chance to write in the overall paragraph or in the body paragraphs, you can add that in the closing paragraph. Make sure you don't use the words in conclusion in the closing paragraph because it's not a conclusion. Examples. So if you have a situation like this one, how can you write a closing paragraph? The easiest thing that you can do is to comment on the highest scores. Like this example, it's worth noting that the highest score subject for males was math. So math was the highest score subject for males. Whereas the highest for females were English and German. Females, English, and German. So you comment on the highest points, the highest variables, or the opposite, the lowest. So this is another example here. It's worth noting that the lowest score subjects for males were German and geography, while the lowest for females was science. So you can either comment on the highest or the lowest. That's something that you can do. Here in this situation, to sum up, in 1990, the countries which had the highest number of international companies were Germany and England. Again, we're focusing on the highest numbers, 90 and 70 respectively. And they remain the top two countries in 2010, albeit with a considerable gap in favor of Germany. So one more time, if you're writing a closing paragraph, perhaps you can comment on the most extreme numbers, the highest numbers or the lowest numbers. That's what you can do. To summarize everything that I talked about in this video, in task 1, you should have introduction, which is a paraphrase of the question, an overall paragraph, which focuses on the main features, body paragraphs that follow the pattern you wrote in the overall paragraph, and finally, a closing paragraph, which is optional. I have some useful tips for you here. Use a very formal language. Never use words like I or we, I think, we think. Don't offer your opinion, and this is very important. Don't try to explain why something is happening. So if you remember the task about males and female scores in examination, don't explain why. Don't say because females like languages, for example, whereas males are good at math. Don't try to explain. You're only describing data and you're not trying to explain data. Task 1 is not a place for you to offer your opinion or explain anything. You can do any of that in task 2. You can offer your opinion and explain and do whatever you want to do. But in task 1, you're only describing the numbers. And finally, don't write in conclusion in the closing paragraph. That's it. If you have any questions about the content of this video, you can let me know, please. And thank you for watching. Have a nice time. Assalamu alaikum.